Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you my findings from my Nuffield study tour. I've met some amazing people all over the world, as all the other scholars have as well. Some amazing CEOs, some amazing businesses, visited some incredible countries, and tried to look at the latest best management things, best management practices that are happening all over the world that might be able to add value to my industry, the broiler industry. I'd like to thank my sponsor, Reddick, Chicken Meat Program. The program is funded by statutory levies paid by industry participants, and that levy is matched by Reddick at 0.5% of gross value of production. So thank you very much. And that's headed by Dr. Vivian Kite, who's a research manager. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but she was yesterday. But first, I'd like to thank my crew, so to speak, and firstly to my wife Janine, who looked after our farms whilst I was away. She had lots of chickens to look after, lots of cranky contractors, at times depressed employees, and on a couple of occasions a few overturned trucks full of chicken. So it was not all bells and whistles and roses, I'm sorry to say. And also to my three kids, Tom, Jake and Bonnie, who obviously haven't had Dad around for a lot of the time, but I'm sure I'll make it up to you. So thank you to Janine, my wife, and she's been an amazing rock through this whole process, and I thank her every. And secondly to Nuffield, what an amazing opportunity we've all been presented. It's just a start, I believe, although it's come to a bit of an end right now, and I think the current guys are pretty keen to have this process finished, but it will continue on into the future, I'm sure. Very brief background. We are obviously meat chickens for Steggles. It was said to me the other day when I explained exactly what we did do. I said we're essentially taking Untitled chickens, and he said, well, you're a feathered feedlot. That's what we really are. Yes, that's essentially what it is. We receive the chicken and we receive the feed and we grow these birds out to their required weights. Our current farm, we place about 450,000 birds every 10 weeks. And we use about 11,000 tonnes of grain sourced from the local area every single year. Look, just briefly with our current production in Australia, the interesting thing to note here on this slide is that Australia is 660 million birds, approximately, and that's obviously increasing every year. The US population is 15 times larger than Australia's, but so too is their chicken production, 15 times larger. It's an incredible statistic. Our chicken kilos per person is estimated in years, probably in the next 12 months, to be 48 kilos per person. We've exceeded the US. Our area alone in New South Wales, we're about 17% of Australia's production in Tamworth, and we need an extra 38 million birds now with new processing facilities coming online, just to keep up with the domestic consumption demands that James has obviously spoken about previously. And as you can see by all the marketing material, everybody is increasing their consumption of chicken. Just very briefly on this graph, chicken is the green line, and it is the consumption. And why is it happening? Well, it's cost per kilo. It's a very cheap protein to produce. It's an affordable protein. It's a ready-made meal variety, and it's obviously backed by powerful marketing. I used the example of McDonald's a couple of years ago, introduced a full chicken menu, which I absolutely love. And it stands along their beef menu, but it just seems to be something they thought they needed to do at the time. The efficiency of chicken meat, I remember my dad in 1970, when he started out on the farm, a 2 kilo chicken took 70 days to produce. A 2 kilo chicken took 70 days. Now, a 2 kilo chicken takes 35 days and less to produce. So it's going increasingly quick. And and it will keep declining, but you know the gains are obviously a lot slower than what they were. Feed conversions are now around 1.6 kilos of feed to 1 kilo of meat. So my study topic, getting onto that, is reducing costs through renewable energy technology. We have a very high electricity demand and gas for heating demand on our farm, and as does the rest of the industry. I focus my study on what areas can we actually try and reduce our costs in, and it was through electricity and heating. Oops. So I looked at AD plants. From here on in, the AD means anaerobic digestion. Those anaerobic digestion plants were in a number of countries: the USA, Canada, Germany, Holland and the UK. Along those countries as well, we saw the broiler farms again and biomass plants. Very, very briefly, the anaerobic digestion process is basically the degradation of organic material to produce biogas. You put the biogas into a generator, it generates electricity. The two products that are produced obviously is biogas and digester, which is a fertiliser, a solid fertiliser can be produced in a liquid fertiliser as well. When I was in Pennsylvania, I visited a number of dairies with Cornell University just to look at the way they were using their system and the way they were using their digestate. Essentially, they were squeezing, at the end of the process, they were using their digestate and they were squeezing the water out of it, drying it, stockpiling it, and putting it back underneath the cows as bedding material. So essentially, in the broiler industry in Australia, we've got an opportunity to have a percentage of that digestate reinserted back into our sheds as bedding material for our broiler chicks. It's not being done currently anywhere in the world, but who knows, we might be the first. So look, a typical installation, I saw it in the UK. There's my pointer. Here we go. Yeah, so essentially the mixing tank where all the ingredients go in to start off with, to the digestate tank where this is the byproduct, where then once the squeezing takes place, the dry digestate drops on the floor, and this is the area where that could be essentially sent back straight into the chicken farm for bedding. Pretty simple process. This guy had a lot of grazing country around him, a lot of access to corn crops, whole crop rye, and obviously consequently chicken manure. Chicken manure only made up 30% of the recipe, which is something that we need to consider in Australia. What are the cost reductions that are possible on this farm as a result of doing that installation? Well, gas for heating is completely eliminated because the water is heated by the generator heat and it's sent through the whole farm. It obviously heats everything in place of the gas. The electricity is obviously produced, and that eliminates, provides electricity for ventilation. Shavings, as I mentioned, freight of all the inputs. Options to sell the fertiliser to the surrounding farming community is a massive opportunity, but needs to be a separate business entity, I think, on its own. And obviously, from an animal welfare point of view, the dry litter that is produced from these systems is phenomenal. I saw rainy days, big birds in sheds in the UK that were actually on the driest floor that I've ever seen. That in turn is a massive animal welfare benefit, and obviously lesser known is produced as well. Moved down to Norfolk, where I met these guys, Nigel and Patrick Joyce. They were in biomass, so that is the burning of chicken manure. The biomass system quite obviously is the chicken manure straight from the sheds to a manure storage on farm. Here's the sheds are offside and around here, but straight onto a storage, all approved by the Department of Ag, all approved by the EU. That's what that sign actually says in the front of it there. It's an approved facility now by the European Union. In that shed is this automatic loader that drags the manure onto a belt, and the belt feeds these two great big burners. So they are burning manure. The heat produced from that is heating water, and that water is transported through the whole 16 sheds on this farm, provides all the heat. Now in Australia, obviously our climate doesn't need as much heat as what they do. We do also need heat, but to add on to this system, the next thing will be an electricity generator right to the side of it, which utilises the actual waste heat coming out of this process. So the generation of waste heat to electricity will be the next process that actually happens here. Again, gas heating is eliminated. The sale of ash, 8% of the manure going in is ash at the back end of this process. Again, that's a fertiliser product which is high in nutrient. Electricity will soon be available, as I said, and dry litter year round. The thing that I loved about this process, these farmers, was that they remained a farmer and they weren't a plant operator. They can get very tied up in an anaerobic digestion process, which is very complicated. It works very well and runs very, very efficiently, but you want to make sure your core business and your focus is not taken off what you actually currently do, and that is chicken farming, which is exactly how they felt. A couple of other observations from around the world was that I saw a couple of anaerobic digestion plants in Germany actually go into receivership, had gone into receivership. They couldn't lock in their ingredients, so massive key to the whole thing in terms of anaerobic digestion is that you need your ingredients locked in. You can't have price fluctuations. It doesn't work at all. Just going on to another product that can be extracted out of the AD process, and that is phosphorus, which obviously a lot of people use. There's potential for phosphorus recovery at the back end of these plants. I saw one in use in Holland. The phosphorus recovery has the potential to be half the value of the electricity produced from the plant, and it makes up a third of the revenue. So it's a critical area that needs to be looked at, and it's obviously MAP that's actually produced. Key facts about these renewable energy areas around the world was that a report recently commissioned by the biogas, on biogas, there was a biogas opportunities roadmap by the USDA. 11,000 on-farm digesters in their report were mentioned that they believe it's necessary to have these things on farms and needed in the US. The UK farmers are actually paid a pence per kilowatt incentive to produce heat. So you now got farmers setting up anaerobic digestion plants in a lot of places because of the incentive that's available. We need to be very careful about those sort of incentives and not have a rush into these things for the wrong reasons. They really need to be funding themselves. I'll go into that. The UK, in Holland, sat down with Rabobank in Holland, and it was across the whole banking area in Holland, is that they will not fund these projects unless there is a use for the heat at the back end. So obviously the two products, electricity and heat produced. Electricity is fine, everyone knows they can use that, but the heat, unless they use that heat, the banks will not fund it. Germany, as I mentioned, they are running into massive issues with their recipes into these anaerobic digestion plants. The cost of the maize was 23 euros per tonne 5 years ago. It's now 63 euros per tonne 6 weeks ago. So there's a massive spike in the input cost, and as a result, sent a lot of these guys to break. So a couple of really interesting points to take away from that industry. Other opportunities, as I was obviously able to see so many things came past me. I thought I've just got to make sure I take a note of all this. Other opportunities are air washers. A lot of the urban encroachment around Australia, and everyone knows intensive industries do pop a bit. Air extracted from these buildings can be washed. A lot of the dust can be washed out. A lot of the ammonia compounds can be washed out. There are facilities around the world whereby, and there are actually in Germany and Holland right now, where air washers have to be installed on a brand new building prior to it being commissioned. It's part of the DA process. If you build a new chicken farm or a piggery, you have to have an air washer at the end of that installation. Big dollars, they do cost a lot, and it adds to your running costs because of the pressures from the fans that are put on the building. So we need to be very careful of it, but is that something that may be transferred to Australia or, you know, down south as part of regulations? We don't know. Housing is a massive thing in Holland in particular. We talk about RSPCA with Jodes and what's happened to our industry. Well, the RSPCA is dictating everything that happens right now. In Holland it's called better living, or beter leven, as it was said to him. And this is an example of a shed that has been constructed for a higher welfare option. And obviously, admittedly, with less density in the sheds, less dense sheds means that more sheds are needing to be built. But this is an option that the supermarkets have now signed up to. Albert Heijn, the biggest supermarket over there, is now only supplying sourcing birds from this style of sheds for his high-end, like Waitrose supermarkets. What happens here is essentially inside the shed. This is inside where a standard chicken shed is. Obviously on the outside here is pop holes and windows. No farm in Australia has windows at all. Every farm in Europe has windows. And essentially the pop holes are usually associated with free range. Well, this is a pseudo free range. This is keeping the birds in a veranda environment. There's no food or water, but there are curtains here and up here that let light in. But it's keeping out the wild birds and ducks and geese and everything else that can contaminate our industry. These guys had built the shed and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They thought it was the best thing they'd ever done. But keep in mind, that's the whole contents of inside the shed, and the shed is about 5 times the size. So they're coming out there, they're dust bathing, and they're getting the roll up. So in-shed hatching is another thing we've seen. Essentially, these chicks are normally hatched at the hatchery. They're now being hatched in sheds on farm. It's another major advancement. Normally these things are 36 hours. Normally the chicks are 36 hours before they arrive on the farm, but these are obviously getting the feed and water instantly. This is a trial process that's actually taking place around the world. What can we take away straight away? Biomass obviously is suited to smaller sites where there's no land area, anaerobic digestion on larger sites where there's lots of cropping. Air washing is obviously available. It is at a cost, and in-shed hatching certainly helps. Massive opportunity for the Australian chicken industry to expand further. It's obviously, in terms of the anaerobic digestion market now, though, there's the opportunity for green branding. If we can get this green branding message out, that we're actually, we're using renewable energy, that could be a potential option for the processors and supermarkets, as long as the growers have some sort of ownership or equity in that process as well. But very briefly, just to wrap up, last 3 slides very, very quickly. When I had the opportunity, when I was in Canberra, before I went on the DFP, I actually found my great uncle who was in the war. His name was Guy Hebblewhite as well. So I thought I'd find where he actually, where he was and what he did. He was obviously in Pozieres, and I found him in a restaurant in Pozieres, and his name was on the wall there, and he was at a cemetery in Villers Britain, and had the opportunity to duck away for a whole day and try and find his headstone, but I couldn't find it. So I've got to go back again to try. But thank you very much. That was a highlight for me. There's my future farmers.